Welcome to the Pipeline, the Western Standard's weekly live broadcast discussing issues relevant to you in Western Canada and maybe informative for our friends outside of the West who need to understand what the hell is going on here. Much of today, though, is not just discussing exclusively what's happening in the West. We'll be discussing Trudeau, the speech from Trudeau's throne. We'll be discussing closer to home. BC Premier John Horgan breaking the province's fixed election law and the early election taking place there, the implications for breaking that law, and what we expect to shape up in the early parts of this election. And strange news from the Wexit movement, changing their name from the Wexit Party to the Maverick Party. And we'd really like your input on all three of these topics. You can go to the comments. You can contact us on Twitter, although the best way for us to see this, make sure we don't, that we can actually see your question, is to get us on Facebook. Before we get going, please remember to go to westernstandardonline.com and go to the membership section if you're not already a member, and become a member of the Western Standard. Your contributions ensure that we can have an independent, genuinely independent media here in Western Canada that is not beholden to government funding, isn't controlled by the golden triangle of most of the other private media outlets of Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. Your support ensures that we can continue to make sure that we have a genuinely independent Western media here. Joining me today, I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Joining me today is Dave Naylor, the news editor of the Western Standard. Hi, Dave. Beautiful. Can't you tell from the beautiful weather on this completely live shot behind me? Yeah, it's actually a beautiful day here in Calgary. Also joining us, but not on video today due to technical issues, but joining us by audio is Cory Morgan. Cory Morgan, do you want to verbally wave to the camera? Normally, Cory leads off the kind of hosting referee role in this podcast and live broadcast. But without him available by video today, I'm gonna try and take my hand and see how well it does. Okay, well let's start off. Speech from Trudeau's throne. Trudeau prorogued Parliament a bit over a month ago for reasons that had nothing to do with the WE scandal and inquiry. Dave, why don't you lead us off and set the table about what were the contents of the speech from the throne? Yeah, Dave, your video has been frozen. Was frozen for some time, but some people are saying there's no audio. So maybe. Oh, geez, it looked like we had some audio issues there. Dave, that was wonderful. But do you want to briefly recap what you just said about the throne speech? I suppose we just had a long intro from you without much. So maybe just briefly recap what it is you just said.
Oh, Derek, I nailed it. I nailed it.
I know
I
it
didn't.
was beautiful. It was
Oh,
poetry.
I didn't
You'll
remember all
never
the
replicate it
notes.
again. But just give your best. Give a quick synopsis of the throne speech again.
Liberals promised everything under the sun, jobs. See, there I go. I'm umming and ahhing. Women's issues, daycare across the board, pharmacare, jobs for everybody. It's going to be sunshine and lollipops. No total cost given on it, the billions of dollars. All the provincial premiers are against it. The federal Tory party came out and said they will not support it. The Bloc Quebecois said they will not support it. So the government's resting on the NDP party now to see whether they will survive or will be in an election. He typically was very wishy-washy last night, but I predict in the end they will support it and there will be no election. Derek, hopefully my sound worked then.
Well, Dave, you've got some funny noises in the background, I think, from your electronic devices. If you can mute that, please. Well, thanks very much. Cory, what was your take on the throne speech and the contents of it and how the politics is going to play out between if did Trudeau want another party to support this so there wasn't an election? And do you think he's got any hope from the NDP or the Bloc?
Clearly, Trudeau doesn't want an election. So anybody who's wondering about that, I mean, he put out an NDP statement, basically. He promised spending on everything with absolutely no mention on how he's possibly going to fund it. Jagmeet Singh could have written that throne speech. So, I mean, I understand that the Trudeau government have been a free-spending, left-leaning government as it is anyways, but in light of that throne speech, it's clear that he modeled that to make sure he kept that NDP support so we don't have to go to the polls. And the other thing that was odious about it is then he used that as a point to leap off with that addressing the nation. So he got, the entire mainstream media up and sitting and watching, a lot of Canadians up and sitting and watching time. And this is usually only done if there's a constitutional crisis or an act of war or something serious with that. Boy, Trudeau has to be saying something of significance. Is he going to resign, or does he feel that we do have to drop the writ over this throne speech or something of the sort? And no, he mumbled a little bit about a spike in the COVID deaths, or not even deaths, infections, I should say, and then just went on with a grandstanding, self-serving political speech. Talk about a slap in the face to the media who danced to his tune and gave him that free airtime. I hope the next time that jackass calls for a State of the Nation address like that, they tell him, no, sorry, we got to run out of the throne speech in his nice breathless voice while he was hugging.
The media learned their lesson from giving Trudeau free airtime. Fat chance of that, I'd say. But certainly many of them were a bit upset. They might work for him now and take tax dollars handed out from him, but they had their knickers a bit in a knot. You're right. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the scale of a declaration of war, but it generally has to be an issue of major national significance. And it was generally just saying, please download the app, social distance, wear a mask, and vote for Justin. It was pretty simple stuff that he just wanted airtime for. That all 13 premiers have already said ad nauseum. Some of them at the point of a gun. So it was pretty strange. I think you're right. This throne speech could have been written by the NDP, but the NDP can't say that. They have to try and remain politically relevant. It's always very difficult for the NDP to remain relevant when there's a pretty hard left-leaning Liberal government in power. When there were moderate Liberals like if we call them that, like Michael Ignatieff or Paul Martin, or to an extent Jean Chrétien, the NDP were able to kind of carve out a niche as the real left party. But when there's been pure Trudeau or Justin Trudeau in power, it's very difficult for the NDP to stay relevant. So even though the NDP could have written this throne speech, and I doubt there's really nothing they could genuinely disagree with in there, they have to try and find little things to nitpick. And because they haven't closed the door on voting for it yet, it seems like they're setting the table to get some minor amendments to the throne speech, so they can claim victory, that they got something out of it. And I doubt ideologically Justin Trudeau would have very much of a problem with anything they would propose. So I'm expecting that the government's going to survive the throne speech here. There will be no fall election unless something very strange happens, but it won't happen on the throne speech. I think we're now looking at a spring election rather than everyone panicking as the media perennially like the navel gaze about a fall election here. So there's a bit of breathing room.
Derek, the government announced today that they were going to be increasing the benefit for unemployment people who were on CERB from $400 a week to $500 a week, which that would be enough for the NDP to sign on.
Yeah, one of the key demands was the extension of CERB. I don't see the Trudeau government having a problem with that. They're now trying to float utopian ideas of a permanent guaranteed basic income, whatever you want to call free money. And so, the left have been having wet dreams right now about the idea of turning CERB into a universal basic income. So I think it's highly likely that we're going to see it. I don't think CERB goes away until the election's over. People enjoy having the money come from thin air in Ottawa, as people tend to believe it comes from. So I think the Liberals will be very willing to sign on to an extension of CERB as a key NDP demand. I think that's something the Liberals would do anyway, but they probably left that out of this throne speech so that they have something that they can give the NDP, make it look like the NDP got a win out of it. Anything else on the throne speech?
Going further, I mean, some of the things he also dipped into that I kind of didn't expect, though I'm not shocked with, like he was talking about national pharmacare program. He was talking about a national child care program. Like, these are huge multi-billion-dollar initiatives that aren't even fleshed out. And then he hinted at a whole pile of other things. I noticed Naheed Nenshi made sure to jump right out with his hand and say if he can just get enough from Trudeau out of this, he's going to end homelessness. And this is an unbelievable kind of open commitment to everything. It'll be interesting to see, I guess, as it goes through Parliament when they actually try to make legislation to follow up on these broad promises.
Thankfully, the Liberals have promised a national daycare program, a national pharmacare program for about 40 years and not delivered it. So that is the only silver lining, is they're probably lying about it again, hoping that their voters are dumb enough to believe it. This is a regular ploy by the Liberals to show up their left flank, to keep swing voters between them and the NDP in their camp, believing that their voters are Charlie Brown, that they're going to go for it again. It's kind of like Conservatives promising balanced budgets. They promise it every time. They tend not to deliver it, or at least with very much gusto. It's equivalent of balanced budgets on the left. They'll promise it every time. They don't deliver it. And thankfully, at least from my perspective, that's a good thing that they're lying. Okay, well, let's move to more craziness, but where an election actually has been called on the West Coast. In BC, last week, BC Premier John Horgan has broken both his pact with the NDP for a kind of quasi-coalition government, which was supposed to last 4 years in their agreement. And he's also broken BC's fixed election law, which dictates that there's not supposed to be an election right now. But fixed election legislation in Canada's quasi-Westminster parliamentary system, is a bit of an odd fit, because Parliament exists at the confidence of the House. Governments exist at the confidence of the House. And you can't force a premier or a prime minister to continue governing if they want an election. So, while you don't go to jail for this kind of breaking the law, it certainly breaks the spirit of it and wrecks any confidence people have that there'll be a fixed election date that the government will respect. Jim Prentice's wantonly throwing out of the fixed election date in Alberta in 2015 shattered confidence in that legislation that people can have in a fixed election date in Alberta. For all 4 years of Rachel Notley's government, people speculated that she would not respect it as well. There was speculation that she would call an early election to preempt a merger of the Wildrose and PCs, that she would try to stop that. That was a perennial boogeyman, not one that I ever personally believed in. I thought it was always more likely, and I was speculating that she would delay the election to the 5th year, which they can do constitutionally, but not legally under the Elections Act, that she would delay it in hopes that more scandal would come out from the various issues the UCP and Kenney had, or at the very least just to get an extra year and hope something the economy turns around or something. But Prentice's breaking of that law in 2015 shattered everybody's confidence in that. I generally think in Alberta that Kenney will live by the fixed election date, but no one has complete confidence in that anymore because trust in that law was so completely shattered by Prentice in 2015. I think the same thing has now happened in BC, where Horgan's been riding high in the polls. He couldn't help himself but to take advantage of the situation. Very similar has happened with Alberta in 2015. And all the polls show that he's going to cruise his way to a huge majority government. Dave, do you want to? Maybe I preempted you a little bit, but do you want to maybe set the table about the reaction to this in BC and what the implications are right now?
I guess the lure of a majority government was just too much for Premier Horgan. As you mentioned, he is riding high in the polls, enough for a majority government. Right now, he sort of governs at the pleasure of the Green Party. Interestingly, it's going to be the COVID pandemic. He's called the election for October 24th, which is a Saturday. 44% of polling stations last election in BC were at schools. So they're going to have the election on Saturday. Then they've got a day to scrub all the schools out before the kids come back. They expect 40% of voters, that's 800,000 votes, Derek, to be mail-in ballots. And they cannot even legally start counting the mail-in ballots until 13 days after the election is held. So that takes you into November before they even start to count those ballots. Then they've got to properly register, is probably counted in the riding that they represent. So it's going to be at least 3 weeks, say elections officials, until the results of the October 24th ballot are made public or made official. I mean, that's some City of Calgary election counting going on right there.
That would actually make the City of Calgary look good. That's third world stuff where we have to wait a month for a result.
Yeah, City of Calgary, I think, uses abacuses to count their ballots. It's going to be an interesting election because of the all the campaigns have to abide by coronavirus rules. So you can't have the big election rallies and stuff that you're normally used to in an election. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks on the campaign trail, Derek.
Cory, what are your thoughts on the early call here? Do you think that voters, generally the thought on early elections from political strategists is, people be upset for a day and then they move on. The exception, not to beat this dead horse, but an exception to that was in 2015 when Jim Prentice called an election a year early. But that was in some particularly unique circumstances surrounding the shelf life of that government and a lot of other nasty political stuff that had been taking place in the province. Do you think, Cory, do you think that voters in BC are going to punish the government for this, or are they just going to move on?
Yeah, well, I don't think we could compare it to when Prentice went, because as you said, that was also coupled with a lot of issues that really questioned his principles and his motives. With the floor crossing and a great number of issues that really shattered confidence in pretty much everybody who was sitting in the legislature at that time. Horgan doesn't have that going on, and it's kind of, as you said, it's people like us or close political watchers who get annoyed when things like fixed election dates get abused. But your average voter got close attention to it, and by the end of the campaign, it's not going to be that big a factor with them. Horgan's riding high, and I don't see a real powerhouse coming out of the Liberals to challenge him, though we will see. I mean, campaigns are crazy times. As Dave said, it's kind of unprecedented, though I got a feeling that the limited campaign is going to reduce the amount it could swing. You don't have live rallies that'll build some hype. You can't even really get your candidates door knocking to try and get some of those upsets that could get out there and really work the ground and take a few seats or something. I mean, this is all going to be based on the leaders and almost digital campaigning and how much that impacts the status quo. I don't think it will very much, and Horgan probably will cruise to an easy re-election. I don't mind being proven wrong when the time comes. And due to the late Counting, yeah. I don't know if we'd want to do a live event to try and cover that sucker. We'd have to sit online for a couple of weeks.
The Tory leadership race was bad enough. About roughly 6 hours overdue. I'm not sure we could sit around for the better part of a month. But I do think that despite the delays that will come in with the huge numbers of mail-in ballots, I think we're going to have a pretty good idea of who's going to win for the most part on election night. Because the mail-in ballots, they tend to favor, to a small extent, parties of the right, because mail-in ballots are going to be older people, because they're going to be more concerned about COVID. Mail-in ballots in normal elections outside of a pandemic, they're also disproportionately used by older voters who might be on, they might be snowbirds away. Although I'm not sure how much BC has snowbirds, because at least in the lower mainland, it's so much warmer there than the rest of Canada. People move to BC to retire. But those mail-in ballots tend to favor parties of the right. In BC, they don't really have a major party of the right, though. The Liberals are not considered a party of the right or even center right. They're just generally considered the not NDP party. If you want a party that's not explicitly socialist, you vote for the BC Liberals. The BC Conservatives have been polling somewhat respectively, around 6 to 8%, but they traditionally are not organized. They don't get attention. They don't have enough money. So, they might be able to make a little bit of a dent in a couple of interior BC ridings. But those are likely ridings, for the most part, that the Liberals already have a lock on and the NDP can't win. So on election night, I still think we're going to get a pretty good idea, expecting that the mail-in ballots are more or less going to follow the pattern of the ballots that are cast in person at polling stations, and that things could shift a few degrees. So, the ridings that are within 5, maximum 10%, we have to keep an eye on that. But if the NDP perform anywhere close to what they're doing in the polls, which is pushing around 50% right now, the only question then from the mail-in ballots will be, do they have a majority or a huge majority? So I still think this is going to be worth covering on election night. Just a lot of asterisks and question marks wherever there's any kind of close race.
Derek, I'm going to have to disagree with you here. I don't think that the mail-in ballots for this election anyways will just be strictly from older people. I don't think anybody wants to go stand in line and vote during COVID. I think the number of mail-in ballots will be huge across the age range. If you're a young mother with a couple kids, you don't want to go stand in line and expose your kids to COVID. You're going to go for the mail-in ballot. They're expecting 800,000 of them. That's not just elderly voters. But I think you're right. I think it's the NDP. Before I get to that, there was also a poll before the election showing the majority of voters did not want an election during COVID. So that's also going to spike up the mail-in ballots. A poll released today showed 44% in favor of Premier Horgan. So I don't think there's much doubt, unless there's a major campaign issue or a campaign flub, that he will get majority. But I don't think it's going to be on election night. It'll take those 3 weeks to see how big a majority it is.
Well, mail-in ballots have never been exclusively older people, but they are disproportionately older people. I think it's going to be used much more broadly by other demographics, but I think it'll still be disproportionately used by senior citizens, because they are the most at risk of COVID by massive margins. They're the most likely to be, I'm not sure how many snowbirds are going to be gone at this time of year, because it's still fall. And in BC, it's practically still summer until December. But I think it's still going to be used disproportionately by them. But, if we take your argument that it's going to be used in roughly equal measure by all the different demographics and all the different areas in BC, that means that, for the most part, Election Day will be a giant poll, and it'll probably give a good indication of the way the results are going to come in. And the mail-in ballots, well, they'll be huge in numbers. If their votes are still in the same proportion as those that were counted in person on Election Day, all they're really going to do is only make a difference in close marginal ridings decided between 5, maximum 10%. So the big thing to look at is not who's just leading in each of the ridings on election night. We're going to have to look at the margin of those. So it's going to take a much more detailed election analysis to be able to call the election on election night. But as I said, if they're anywhere close, if the NDP is anywhere close to what they what they're looking at for the polls they've got right now, they've got it in the bag. Cory, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I kind of agree. We're still going to get actually a pretty good picture of where the general thing is going to go and who's probably going to be in government. I mean, we might see an anomaly where it's just really tight and then we'll just have to sit on the edge of our seats for a few weeks. But more than likely, again, yeah, due to that sheer volume and the broad amount of people who are going to be using those ballots, I don't know if it'll swing the in-person vote that much one way or another. So we will have to certainly be watching closely on election night.
Right. Well, before we move on to our next topic, I mean, we'll just bring it back to throne speech for a second. Right while we're sitting here, a statement issued from Rachel Notley has just come across the wire. Quite a not unexpected, but bizarre. I've still got some friends left in the NDP from my time in politics. And we chit chat about different things. And I keep on telling them the big error of the NDP in Alberta is that they're not viewed as the home team. They're viewed the way Conservatives are viewed in Quebec, that they want votes there, but they're not really viewed as the home team. They're viewed with suspicion that they're not for them first. And the NDP are just constantly aligned with Ottawa. I keep telling them, if you guys want to be relevant in Alberta, you've got to be seen more as the home team. And just coming across my desk now is a statement from Rachel Notley blasting Kenny for his criticism of Justin Trudeau's throne speech. Now, it's not unexpected that the leader of the opposition criticizes the premier. That's pretty regular stuff. But traditionally, that takes the form of criticizing the premier for not being tough enough with Ottawa. That's not the case here. Notley, I'm not going to put words in her mouth. It's not a crazy long statement. I won't read the whole thing here, but she's saying, "How dare you attack Ottawa for this? You're failing here at home." I mean, like there's some fairness in that they have failed to create jobs. Some of that is the pandemic. Some of that is that their policies might not be working as well as they had expected, because they're kind of a mishmash of capitalist free market, low taxes, but also huge, massive corporate welfare of the kind you saw from Getty, from Redford, and from Notley herself. It's fair enough to say that she might be distracting from things. But then she's outright saying that Kenny shouldn't be criticizing the speech from the throne, that it's bad for relations with Ottawa. It really just looks like the NDP has not learned the lesson that the biggest problem with the NDP with voters in Alberta isn't just that they're socialist or democratic socialist, depending on what kind of weird terminology you want to use. It's that they are they're viewed as doing the bidding of Ottawa, and they still haven't seemed to learn that lesson. I'll give it to you guys for reaction for a second. I'll be back to the broadcast in 1 second.
Just looking at Notley's speech, which you probably may or may not have in front of you, Derek, or Cory, I'm sorry. She calls Kenny's reaction a, quote, abdication of leadership, unquote. I think we're getting some Winnie talk here. She says Albertans, quote, deserve a leader who will do the hard work of building a real economic recovery plan. A leader who will continue to do what it takes to get, and continuing on with a quote from Kenny, a leader who is, from Notley, a leader who is laser focused on the challenges facing Alberta, not fake fights with federal politicians. So, yeah, Derek was right. The NDP is again throwing their lot in with the federal Liberals.
Well, I want to have to say Premier Notley ever again. Walk down the garden path hand in hand with Justin Trudeau. If she really thinks that's something that's going to help her out in Alberta, boy, Rachel, go knock yourself out. I mean, aside from, that what they're kind of said, it's just a natural inclination for the NDP and the left to believe in central government as opposed to regional leadership. This is going above and beyond, though, and that's getting in bed with the Liberals and saying that we don't have a dispute with Ottawa when Alberta has had a dispute with Ottawa since 1905. So, carry on, Madam Notley, and the rest of us will work on supporting what Albertans actually want to see.
Every time she does this, Kenny and his staff are popping corks in the Premier's office. They just don't learn. This is a loser in Alberta. Alberta is very much like Quebec in the sense that we like our premiers, we like our government to be seen as on the home team. And if there's a hostile government in Ottawa, they want to see them fighting it. And really, I'm not sure why Notley continues this. People in her own team, who I know pretty well, they all feel deeply betrayed by Justin Trudeau. Remember, Notley went on a huge limb working with Justin Trudeau on the whole carbon tax nationally and buying in. They really took a risk on him. And then he turned around and screwed them on a couple of big files on pipelines and stuff, left them hanging in the wind because, Notley had pitched a thing as a grand bargain. Well, we're going to have this carbon tax and Ottawa will be nice to us and give us this and give that on pipelines. And then Trudeau turned around, killed Energy East, killed Northern Gateway. Didn't lift a finger for Keystone XL. So they feel deeply betrayed by this guy, but they somehow still feel this loyalty towards central federal control in Ottawa, and I don't think it serves them well politically. But if that's what's in their hearts, that's what's in their hearts, and they should speak their mind. But whenever they do, they're popping corks in the Premier's office. Well, why don't we move on to what's going on? Well, speaking of a home team, let's deal with what's happening within the sovereignist movement right now. Wexit Canada, which has undergone already some transformation. Several months ago, it earned a new interim leader in Jay Hill. That was seen to give it huge credibility. He was a former senior Harper cabinet minister and leader of the government in the House of Commons. It's a very key position in the government. He was a key confidant of Harper. He was one of the original class of 1993 Reform MPs. And he came on as the interim leader of Wexit. A lot of people, supporters and detractors alike, said that this is a big deal. It's a game changer. It gives them a huge degree of credibility. It's been an open discussion for some time, knowing that they're going to be changing their name to something probably a bit more professional. Those of us who watch this kind of thing closely thought it would be something like the Buffalo Party or the Western Independence Party or Western Alliance or even Western Bloc. So many of us were very, very surprised when Dave broke the story exclusively with the Western Standard when they announced that their new name was going to be the Maverick Party. It's unique at the least, and reactions have been pretty mixed. Dave, why don't we put it to you about what really went on here, how it happened, what the reasoning was, and then we'll get some comment from Cory.
The Wexit Party or Wexit Canada had a Facebook poll whether or not to change their name, and 2/3 of yes. Had their first in-person meeting ever, and out of that board meeting came the name the Maverick Party. It's either the most brilliant move in political history or the stupidest. I still haven't figured it out myself, Derek, and this is where I admit I'm the only guy in the Western world not to have seen the movie Top Gun, but they were immediately...
Are you serious?
Yeah, afraid so. It's on my list. It's on my list, but there were immediate memes of the Top Gun Maverick. There was Mel Gibson's Maverick, and there were James Gardner's Maverick. So they certainly got a lot of publicity through the name. But I'll leave it to Cory to tell us whether he thinks it'll work or not.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll work or not. I basically, I wouldn't go as far as saying it was mixed. It's almost been universal that people think the name is ridiculous. I tried to kind of play I was trying to play a bit of devil's advocate and polish that turd. And I wrote that piece, trying to at least lay out the name and the need for it and so on. And even then feedback was just, no, that's just not the way to go. Part of why I did that, though, is I really do want to see a decent, unapologetic, regionalist Western Party form. I'm really happy to see Jay Hill take the helm, see these guys build some steam and credibility. And I remember from going depressingly way back to when I led the Alberta Independence Party and then into on the executive with the Wild Rose Party. You can get hung up so badly on some of what are still relatively little things. I remember spending hours after hours in meetings because some people wanted to develop the independent Alberta flag, and they would fight over the colors that were going to be on the bloody flag. Meanwhile, our membership numbers are dropping. We haven't paid this bill or something. But no, we're pissing around fighting over a flag, or we're fighting over the motto, or we're fighting over the party name. And the name is important, but you could be hung up on it forever. I think on Facebook to find out people wanted to change it. Okay, they want to change it. It would have been a great member engagement opportunity. Say, okay, here's 5 names to choose from. Let the members pick their first and second choices. You can make a big to-do about it. It's like a little internal election. Make them feel like they're taking part. You don't have to put 100 names and go down that rabbit hole. Commit to 5 names. Put it out there, engage them, and then get one and settle on it. I'm only guessing that they were sitting around a table probably fighting over it for a long time, and I'm still mixed on as to whether or not, looking at the feedback, whether they should just admit they made a mistake, toss it in the garbage, and do that engagement I was talking about, and then move on, or embrace this thing and hope people kind of forget and try to take this a little more seriously. But I don't think it was a wise move on their part.
Yeah, Cory, I was shocked by your column. It was literally the only positive thing I had seen anyone say about the name change. The people most upset about it are there a lot of their key supporters. I think their opponents, particularly conservatives who are worried about this, they were jumping for joy because it just doesn't sound credible. I mean, as someone who, to ring my own bell a little bit, was probably fairly considered a maverick in politics, I still don't like it as a party name. It just doesn't sound credible. It doesn't sound like it's ready for prime time. Of course, their members said in a poll, when they polled their members, said that they wanted a new name, but they didn't ask them what the name would be. I think, considering the alternative they chose, people would have preferred their old one as insufficient as I think it probably was. This was a big mistake. For their party members who like it, good on you, but it just doesn't come across as credible. As bad as Wexit, I think, was as a name, everybody knew what it was. I mean, even outside of Canada, people had heard of Wexit in Britain. People knew what it was. So if they were going to change their name, which I think they should have stuck with something that at least people understood what it was about right in the name. The Bloc Québécois, you could be from Bangladesh and show up, and if you speak English or French, you kind of know, well, that probably sounds like just a Quebec party. You know what it is. Maverick Party, you have no idea. And so they have no brand recognition whatsoever. People are going to see this on the ballot and not know what it is or what it stands for. So they're going to miss a lot of that protest vote. And I think it diminishes their credibility significantly. I really think that they should, if they're looking to establish themselves as a credible and real force on the political scene in the West, I really think they need to revisit this one. Okay. Oh, and Paul Holmes, former digital editor of the Western Standard, has commented, says, Top Gun was a terrible movie. Don't bother Dave. Yeah, it's not a particularly good movie, but it's kind of just a part of the canon of Western pop culture that you're just going to miss too many references. It's like not watching The Simpsons and, someone's going to talk about monorails and you're just not going to get the reference. So I think, Dave, that you need to watch it. If nothing else, you're just not going to understand all the GIFs and memes of people posting on our pages if you don't watch this movie. It's quite necessary, I think, as subpar as the movie is. Not a ton of questions, but we do have a question from Andrea Kettle-Burrell. She says, will this BC election influence oil transport via the BC border? Let's put you guys. Let's start with Cory. Will the BC election influence essentially Alberta and Saskatchewan's ability to get BC through oil through BC?
Oh, hey, Andrea, it's good to see you out there listening. I don't think this election in particular is going to have much impact on it. The Trans Mountain thing's kind of been settled on as a federal thing. It's going through. It's being pushed. Horgan doesn't want to talk about it. Everybody's coming from the left. If we're looking at future developments or any new pipelines, I don't see anybody in BC standing up looking to promote more of that. I think we've got a big problem for a long time dealing with that if we want to expand capacity. But this election in particular, I don't think it's an issue that's going to be top of mind for BC citizens.
Dave?
Yeah, I think much like the throne speech, I don't think the word pipeline will be mentioned at all. As Cory said, the TMX pipeline is a done deal. And I don't think there's any more new pipelines on, that's going to be close enough to being completed or even talked about for it to be an election issue.
Yeah, I think you're right. You both are right. I mean, essentially, the bargain that Trudeau has struck with himself, and to a lesser extent, Rachel Notley, when she was premier, was we're going to have this carbon tax and we're going to give you a pipeline. But this is the last pipeline. That was very clear with the BC Coast tanker ban legislation. It was very clear with the No More Pipelines legislation, Bill C-69. It has essentially made it impossible for new pipelines to go forward in any realistic way. I do believe Keystone is going to get built. It's just they're way too far into it to stop. I mean, even Jason Kenney would probably become a sovereigntist if they canceled that. I think that Keystone XL is going to go through, but it's the last pipeline I think we're ever going to see in the foreseeable future, regardless of who is in government federally or in BC. It's just unlikely to happen. I think the bigger implication is a continued status quo of the very strange regional alignment in Canada right now. It used to be in the 90s that the Western premiers all worked as a bloc, despite some pretty significant ideological differences. BC had, Glenn Clark, an NDP premier with Ralph Klein, and then Lauren Calvert in Saskatchewan, and whoever the hell was in Manitoba, I can't recall. Sorry, Manitobans. The Western premiers, despite vastly different ideological outlooks, worked as a bloc when dealing with Ottawa and on federal issues. Now, the alignments are very different. You have an ostensibly conservative government in Quebec with the CAQ, the CAQ, aligned with a socialist government in British Columbia on the major issues right now, like transfers and pipelines. Essentially, no changes. Alberta and Saskatchewan are still a very solid bloc, but it's really just the two of them. Ontario, though, while it's aligned with Quebec traditionally it has been aligned with Quebec on most things. It's kind of tried to position itself as the honest broker in the country. It's spoken favorably. Doug Ford has spoken favorably of Alberta's positions vis-a-vis Jason Kenney. But it really hasn't really done much. It hasn't forced any issues. But it has supported pipelines, and it hasn't supported changes to equalization, at least that I'm aware of. But it has supported the very strange case that Kenney is making for the fiscal stabilization fund, which is essentially equalization for half provinces, which is a very bad argument, I think, for Alberta to be making in general. But Ontario has been moderately soft. So now you have socialist BC and conservative Quebec on the same page against conservative Alberta and Saskatchewan and very mushy, very liberal light conservative in Ontario. So the Federation is making for very strange bedfellows right now. Okay, well, I think that's it for today. Our technology is, I think, run smoother today than it has previously. It's still not good, as you can see from the constantly shrinking and enlarging head of Dave Naylor on the side, and the fact that we haven't got Cory here. But that's because he's broadcasting to us from the Boondocks today. I think that's more of a connection issue. But we really thank you for your time. We appreciate you tuning in. Again, if you're not already a member of the Western Standard, please become one now. Go to westernstandardonline.com. Go to the membership section. We are one of the very few independent media outlets in Canada that refuses to accept government funding. And of the independent media outlets that don't take government funding, we're one of the only that don't take union funding either. So if you want there to continue to be a strong and independent Western media, owned, operated, and focused on the West, please become a member, share the word, share this video if you found it interesting. If not, send us a message and tell us why you thought it was crap. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your attention and your support. God bless the West.